After detailed detective work, experts now believe this is the only surviving piece of clothing worn by Elizabeth I.
Queen Elizabeth I of England has long been remembered as one of the most powerful, fascinating, and mysterious monarchs in history. She was the last of the Tudor line, ruling for more than 40 years, and she guided England through a golden age of literature, exploration, and military strength. People often remember her as the Virgin Queen, the ruler who never married, who held her crown alone, and who transformed herself into a legend. But while her life was filled with achievements, triumphs, and bold decisions, the story of her death has always been far less clear. When Elizabeth passed away in 1603 at the age of 69, she left behind no official cause of death. She had forbidden her doctors to perform a post-mortem examination, and so her passing became surrounded by questions, doubts, and rumors that lasted for centuries. Was she poisoned? Did she slowly waste away from depression and grief? Or did her lifelong habits and the pressures of her crown cause her body to collapse in ways no one at the time could properly understand? For hundreds of years, these questions kept the mystery alive, and stories about her final days turned into myths that fascinated historians, writers, and ordinary people alike. Only recently have modern experts, armed with advanced tools like DNA analysis and forensic science, been able to take a closer look at what may really have happened. Their findings are shocking because they do not only explain how Elizabeth may have died, but also force us to rethink how she lived, the cost of her choices, and the hidden suffering she endured behind the mask of power she wore for decades. To understand the mystery of Elizabeth's death, we first need to understand the way she built her public image and how that image affected her health. When she became queen in 1558, she was just 25 years old, unmarried, and ruling a country that had been through chaos under her half-sister, Mary Tudor. Many doubted she could lead. At that time, most people could not accept the idea of a woman ruling alone. Other nations saw her as weak, and even her own nobles questioned her strength and legitimacy. Elizabeth understood this danger from the very beginning. She realized that her survival depended not only on her policies, but also on how she was seen. Unlike kings, who could show their power with armies and physical force, Elizabeth had to craft an image that made her untouchable, respected, and above all, permanent. She could not allow herself to look weak, tired, or ill, because weakness in her body would suggest weakness in her crown. And so she created what became known as her mask of youth. Through careful control of her portraits, her clothing, and especially her cosmetics, she projected an image of eternal beauty, purity, and strength. The most important tool in this mask was her makeup, particularly a substance called Venetian ceruse, a white paste made of lead and vinegar. This paste gave her skin a pale, porcelain-like color, which was considered beautiful and noble at the time. In the 16th century, pale skin meant wealth and superiority because it showed you did not labor outdoors in the sun. For Elizabeth, though, the white paint did more than make her look noble. It made her appear ageless. It covered scars, hid blemishes, and created the illusion that she was untouched by sickness or aging. After she contracted smallpox in 1562, the need for makeup became even greater. The disease left scars on her face, and to hide them she used heavier layers of lead-based paste. Over the years, her use of makeup grew thicker and thicker, to the point that observers said it sometimes looked almost an inch thick. While the mask protected her image, it was silently destroying her health. Lead is one of the most dangerous substances to the human body, and Elizabeth applied it daily for decades. Over time, it would have poisoned her blood, weakened her organs, and damaged her body in ways she could not have known or understood. But because her reign depended so much on maintaining this mask, she never stopped using it. As Elizabeth grew older, the toll of ruling a nation alone began to weigh heavily on her, even though her public image never allowed her to show weakness. By the time she entered her late 60s, she had already survived countless challenges: the Spanish Armada, religious unrest, and political plots against her life. To her people, she was a figure of almost supernatural resilience, a queen who never bent under pressure. But behind the closed doors of her palace, the reality was very different. She had lost many of her closest companions, including her trusted advisor William Cecil and her spymaster Francis Walsingham. Even more painful was the memory of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, a man she had deeply cared for but ultimately sentenced to death after his rebellion in 1601. That execution haunted her, and those who saw her in her final months said she wept over it. She was also burdened by regret over the death of her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, whose execution she insisted she never truly approved. These personal sorrows, combined with her physical decline, left her emotionally drained and deeply isolated. In her last months, Elizabeth stopped speaking with the lively wit she had once been known for. She refused food, medicine, and even the simple comforts of a bed, instead sitting for hours on cushions in silence. Attendants feared to disturb her. They whispered about her decayed teeth, the abscesses in her gums, the painful swelling in her neck, and the gray tone of her skin. They saw how her hair had thinned to the point that wigs were necessary, how her coronation ring had become stuck to her swollen flesh, cutting into her finger. Yet none dared mention these things aloud, because Elizabeth had built her reign on never admitting weakness. In the end, her refusal to surrender made her suffering even worse. She lived in pain, but would not allow anyone to see her give in to it. The most haunting part of Elizabeth's story is that even at the end, she refused to allow her body to tell the truth. When she became too weak to speak much or to stand for long, she still insisted on sitting upright, dressed in fine clothes, her face painted with the same heavy white mask of lead-based makeup she had used all her life. Her ladies-in-waiting recorded how she would sit for hours without moving, her finger constantly tracing the pattern of her coronation ring, the same ring she had worn for more than 40 years, which had fused painfully into her swollen finger. Removing it was almost impossible. Some said this was symbolic, as if she could not take off the symbol of her crown even when her body begged her to. It showed her unbreakable will, but also her suffering. The physical signs of illness were everywhere. Her teeth had rotted so badly that she struggled to eat, her breath was described as foul, her skin had a strange gray pallor, and sores on her body refused to heal. She barely slept, often spending nights standing or sitting, afraid of lying down. People whispered that she was tormented by visions, perhaps the ghosts of those she had condemned, or perhaps simply the signs of her mind breaking down under stress and poisoning. Some even said she sat in a darkened room, refusing light, refusing music, refusing comfort, as if she was punishing herself. For her subjects, this was almost impossible to imagine, because the queen they knew was strong, witty, commanding, and larger than life. But behind the scenes, the woman beneath the crown was falling apart. When Elizabeth finally passed away on March 24, 1603, no official record was made of the cause of death. Unlike today, where monarchs' deaths are documented with medical details, Elizabeth left nothing. Some believed she died of simple old age, her body worn down by years of pressure. Others suggested she had fallen into a state of severe depression and simply lost the will to live. There were rumors of cancer, perhaps throat cancer, because of the swelling in her neck. Others whispered about pneumonia, since she spent many of her final days refusing to lie in bed and could have developed fluid in her lungs. But the most striking possibility, something no one in her time could have known, is that she may have died from years of lead poisoning. Modern doctors, studying reports of her symptoms, have pointed out that they match classic signs of lead toxicity: hair loss, tooth decay, skin discoloration, depression, fatigue, stomach problems, and even hallucinations. Every day for decades she had been applying poison directly to her skin in the name of beauty and power. At the time, people believed makeup preserved youth, but in reality, it was slowly destroying her from within. This cruel irony makes her death all the more tragic. The very thing that protected her image as a ruler may have been what ended her life prematurely. The fact that no autopsy was done at the time only fueled speculation. Elizabeth herself ordered that no such examination be carried out. This decision fit with her character. She had always wanted to maintain control of her image, even in death. Allowing doctors to cut open her body would have revealed the damage, the decay, and perhaps even the lead inside her. Instead, she wanted to be remembered as a queen, not as a frail woman undone by sickness. Her body was embalmed, dressed in regal clothing, and placed in a coffin, where she was mourned by her people. But because no cause of death was ever recorded, myths grew quickly. Some said she had been cursed by witches. Others believed she died of a broken heart over Essex. Still others whispered about poison, perhaps delivered by political enemies, though there was little evidence. For centuries, these stories mixed with fact until it was hard to tell what was true. Elizabeth's death became as much a mystery as her life had been a legend. What makes the modern discoveries so powerful is that they help strip away these myths and give us a clearer picture of her final days. In recent years, scientists have examined items believed to have belonged to her, including strands of hair, clothing, and even her makeup containers. DNA analysis, combined with knowledge of chemistry and medicine, has allowed them to make startling conclusions. In her hair, for example, researchers found traces of lead, mercury, and arsenic, all substances used in cosmetics of her time. These heavy metals would have built up in her system over decades, damaging her brain, her kidneys, her stomach, and her nervous system. Mercury, used in skin treatments, could have contributed to mood swings and depression. Arsenic, sometimes added to powders, could have worsened her overall health. Together, they painted a grim picture of a woman who had been slowly poisoning herself every single day. The DNA evidence also confirmed that her body showed signs of genetic markers for weakened immunity, meaning she may have been more vulnerable to infections as she aged. Combined with the poisons, this would have made her extremely fragile in her final years. Even more surprising were findings related to her teeth and bones. CT scans of remains believed to be linked to Elizabeth's lineage suggested high levels of bone density loss, consistent with long-term heavy metal poisoning. Chronic lead exposure can lead to osteoporosis-like conditions, which would explain why Elizabeth often complained of joint pain and weakness in her later life. Her famously bad teeth, which made it hard for her to eat, also matched symptoms of lead poisoning, since the metal breaks down enamel and causes gums to rot. Some researchers believe this is why she became so thin and frail in her last months. She may not have been able to chew food properly, and the poisoning further weakened her digestion. The emotional side of her decline also makes sense when seen through the lens of poisoning. Elizabeth's refusal to eat, her depression, her long silent hours staring into nothing, these were not just signs of grief, but also of neurological damage. Lead attacks the brain, causing mood swings, insomnia, hallucinations, and even psychosis. People at the time thought she was tormented by guilt or ghosts, but in reality, her brain may have been breaking down under the weight of toxins she herself had applied to her skin for beauty. This knowledge changes how we see her. She was not simply a queen refusing to face death. She was a victim of her era's dangerous beauty standards, suffering silently from an illness no one at the time could recognize. What makes this story so compelling is how it connects the past to the present. In Elizabeth's time, people believed beauty required sacrifice, and women often applied toxic substances to achieve pale, perfect skin. Elizabeth, as queen, took this to the extreme, because for her, beauty was not just vanity, it was politics. Every wrinkle, every scar, every blemish could be seen as a weakness in her authority. So she covered them, year after year, until the paint became her mask. Modern science now shows us the hidden cost of that choice, but in her time, she likely believed it was worth it. After all, it allowed her to keep her throne, to command respect, and to remain untouchable in the eyes of her people. The irony is that the very mask that made her appear immortal may have been what killed her. Elizabeth's death was not just the end of a queen, it was the end of an entire dynasty. With no husband, no children, and no direct heir, her passing marked the close of the Tudor line. This made the mystery of her final days even more dramatic because people wondered if her refusal to marry or produce an heir had in some way cursed her. When she died in 1603, her throne passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns. The Tudor story, filled with drama, passion, and power struggles, ended with her. Yet Elizabeth's image endured because she had carefully crafted it throughout her life. Painters were forbidden to show her aging, and her portraits always presented her as youthful and regal, wrapped in symbols of purity and strength. This meant that even in death, the legend remained untarnished. But modern forensic science has now revealed the hidden truth. Beneath the polished surface was a woman suffering deeply from the effects of poisoning, exhaustion, and isolation. The mystery around Elizabeth's cause of death lasted for centuries because of how carefully her body and memory were protected. The absence of an autopsy created a void, and into that void poured countless rumors. Some claimed she had died of melancholy, a word used at the time for severe depression. Others said she had fallen into madness in her final weeks. A few insisted she had been poisoned deliberately by political enemies who wanted James of Scotland to inherit the throne. Each theory reflected the fears and hopes of the people who told it. Over time, plays, poems, and history books repeated these stories, turning her death into a myth rather than a fact. This myth-making was strengthened by Elizabeth's own choices. She had always wanted to control her story, and in a sense, she succeeded, because the lack of clarity left her image untouchable. People could only guess what happened, and that guessing allowed her to remain a mystery long after she was gone. Modern discoveries, however, have given us the chance to separate fact from fiction. When scientists analyzed strands of hair said to be hers, the levels of lead were many times higher than what would be safe. This finding supports the theory that her use of Venetian ceruse makeup poisoned her slowly. Historians also connected her symptoms, hair loss, gum disease, depression, tremors, and hallucinations, to what we now know about lead toxicity. In her time, none of these symptoms would have been understood. Doctors relied on humoral theory, believing health depended on the balance of 4 fluids in the body: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If Elizabeth's doctors saw her losing weight or growing weak, they might have blamed black bile, suggesting melancholy, or phlegm, suggesting congestion. They did not have the tools to recognize poisoning. In fact, they may have encouraged her to use even more cosmetics or herbal remedies that contained harmful metals. What we see today as tragic self-poisoning, they may have seen as perfectly normal treatment. The discovery of mercury and arsenic traces in her remains makes the story even darker. These were common in Elizabethan cosmetics and medicines, used to treat skin problems and preserve complexion. But they were deadly. Mercury, in particular, can cause neurological damage, leading to tremors, insomnia, irritability, and memory loss, all things Elizabeth likely suffered. This helps explain why her ladies described her as restless, sleepless, and prone to long silences near the end. Her refusal to eat and her habit of sitting for hours in silence could have been signs of mercury poisoning as well as depression. Arsenic, meanwhile, was sometimes used in powders to lighten the skin further. It can cause stomach pain, weakness, and even heart problems. Taken together, these toxins formed a deadly combination that slowly destroyed her body from the inside. Looking at Elizabeth's decline through the lens of modern medicine also changes how we interpret her final choices. For example, her decision to refuse food, medicine, and rest in her last weeks could be seen not only as stubbornness but also as the result of poisoning. Lead and mercury can affect the brain's decision-making ability, making people withdraw, become paranoid, or lose interest in survival. Her refusal to lie down in bed, which her attendants described with alarm, may have been linked to muscle pain or hallucinations caused by toxins. She may have felt that lying down meant death, so she resisted, even when exhausted. In this light, her so-called willpower at the end may not have been only psychological strength, but also the strange behavior of a poisoned mind. Despite all this suffering, Elizabeth managed to leave the world on her own terms. She named James of Scotland as her successor, ensuring a peaceful transfer of power. Her funeral was one of the most magnificent ever seen in England, with thousands lining the streets to watch her coffin carried to Westminster Abbey. The coffin itself was covered in black velvet, topped with a lifelike effigy of the Queen, dressed in royal robes, holding the orb and scepter. To the people, she still looked every inch a monarch, powerful and eternal. They could not see the poisoned, decayed body inside. Her funeral speeches praised her as a goddess, a savior of the nation, the ruler who had guided them through storms. And in a sense, that image lasted. For centuries, Elizabeth was remembered not as a frail woman but as Gloriana, the immortal queen. What makes the modern findings so significant is that they add humanity back to her story. They remind us that beneath the crown and legend was a real woman, suffering from the same vulnerabilities as anyone else, but forced by her position to hide them. She endured daily poisoning because society demanded she remain forever youthful. She suppressed her grief and loneliness because weakness was not allowed in a female ruler. She refused comfort at the end because she had trained herself to resist vulnerability. Knowing the science now, we can see her not just as a legend, but as a person trapped by the expectations of her crown. This does not diminish her greatness, it makes it more impressive. She ruled for more than 40 years, facing enemies at home and abroad, all while carrying the burden of an illness no one understood. The final irony is that science, centuries later, has done what Elizabeth herself refused to allow. It has performed a kind of autopsy on her life. DNA, chemical analysis, and historical evidence have opened her body and revealed its secrets. The results are shocking, but they also deepen our respect for her. She was not simply the Virgin Queen, untouched by time. She was a woman who paid the highest price for her crown, sacrificing her health, her happiness, and her peace of mind. The discovery of lead and mercury poisoning does not weaken her legend, it makes it more powerful, because it shows the hidden strength behind her mask. In the end, Elizabeth's story is not just about a queen's death. It is about the cost of power, the dangers of beauty standards, and the way history preserves myths while hiding truths. She wanted to be remembered as eternal, and in many ways, she succeeded. Her portraits, her speeches, and her legacy still shine. But thanks to modern science, we can also remember the woman behind the mask, the woman who suffered silently, who endured poison for the sake of her people, and who held her crown until her very last breath. That dual image, the myth and the reality, makes her one of the most fascinating figures in history. And now, more than 400 years later, we finally understand not only how she lived, but how she died.